Ferrari has suffered yet another disaster class of their own, as both of their drivers had to settle for 8th and 10th place in a disastrous weekend that could have ended with a double podium finish. After the ruined opportunity and the decision to stay out for one more lap on slick tires, Hamilton and Leclerc opened up about what could have been. This sparked discussions about whether something needs to change in the team's culture with Hamilton's arrival. But with McLaren's dominance and the Verstappen factor being too big to ignore, are Ferrari set for yet another disappointing season? There's no question about it. Melbourne was a big fumble for Ferrari. Despite massive hype surrounding the Italian squad, it turned out they are nowhere near the top when it comes to decision-making, something crucial in conditions like those in Melbourne. When both McLarens went wide in the final stages of the race and Norris entered the pits, Ferrari had the opportunity to do the same. However, they decided to stay out. Even when Max pitted, it wasn't convincing enough for Ferrari to react. Even Leclerc's suggestion to split strategies between the two cars was ignored, primarily because they weren't receiving the same information from their race engineers. Hamilton was told by Adami that the rain would stop soon and that they could hold on to the slicks. This led the 7-time world champion to be less aggressive in pursuing an alternate strategy. Meanwhile, Bossi informed Leclerc that a Class 3 rain shower was expected for a few laps, something they wouldn't survive on slick tires. This highlights how dysfunctional the team's communication is. The frustration was evident in Hamilton's radio messages when he exited the pit lane under safety car conditions caused by Alonso. He even used profane language, something he could be fined for by the FIA, despite apologizing afterward when he realized his radio was on. Speaking to the media after the race, Hamilton couldn't hide his disappointment. He had expected much more from a car that was supposed to perform well in damp conditions, saying, "The race was very tricky and went a lot worse than I thought it would. The car was really hard to drive today. For me, I'm grateful I kept it out of the wall because that's where I wanted to go most of the time. A lot to take from it. Just getting acclimatized to the new power unit in the wet conditions. It requires a different way of driving and a different setup on the steering wheel. I held on as long as I could, got into the lead at one point, but the guidance on how much more rain was coming was missing. I think we missed out." A particularly interesting moment was Hamilton struggling to overtake Albon for a long period, something he ultimately couldn't do. When he received messages about using the K1 button, it became clear he was still learning the car. At one point, he even snapped at Adami, saying he was too far away to use it. The communication between Hamilton and his race engineer clearly needs improvement as the season progresses. F1 experts believe refining this will be a key priority moving forward. But perhaps the most frustrating aspect was Hamilton being given incorrect information about the rain, which ultimately ruined his race. He had no say in the strategy, which may explain why he took a long pause after receiving Adami's final radio message post-race. His response was reminiscent of the frustrating moments from his last few seasons at Mercedes. Addressing his feelings over the radio, Hamilton said, "Yeah, it wasn't great, but we keep pushing." However, before this, we had already heard some very frustrated radio messages from Hamilton, one in which he blamed Adami for misleading him about the rain's duration. "I thought you said it wasn't going to rain much. We lost a big opportunity there." Adami's response? "Understood only." That response must have stung for a 7-time world champion, especially when he spent most of his race looking at the rear of a Williams car. Another key takeaway is Hamilton publicly stating that he was given the wrong information about the rain. Many fans saw this as a brave move from the 7-time champion. While he acknowledged he's still in a learning phase with the car, the race engineer's role in the strategy failure cannot be ignored. Explaining why his race went so poorly, Hamilton said, "The rain intensified a little in the last sector, but the rest of the track was okay. Obviously, I didn't know where everybody else was. I knew people had pitted, but suddenly it started raining hard and I wasn't warned. No one told me it was raining more elsewhere. Suddenly, I had to deal with it across the track. It was a missed opportunity, but I'm glad I kept it on track." However, it wasn't just Hamilton who was disappointed. Leclerc also shared his frustrations about the Melbourne GP. It was definitely a missed opportunity. In changing conditions like these, when you don't have the pace, that's when you need to capitalize and score points. "We weren't fast enough at the beginning of the race. which made it quite boring. Then, when it really mattered to make the right choices, we didn't. However, the first person to blame is myself. My mistake out of turn 11 cost me 4 positions. That put us on the back foot, and if you look at where those lost positions would have placed us, we could have been fighting for 3rd or 4th place. That was definitely within reach, but that's just how it is. Leclerc himself had several exchanges with his race engineer, with one particular moment standing out: the fact that his seat was full of water. His engineer, Xavi, responded by saying it must have come from the water outside. That's the last thing you want to hear when you're already struggling. Leclerc had made up a couple of places at the start, but he was far off Russell's pace and didn't seem to have any real chance of passing him on merit. Ferrari's disappointment mainly stems from the fact that they admitted on Saturday that they had sacrificed qualifying performance to be more competitive in the race. However, they still ended up being slower than McLaren, Red Bull, and Mercedes. Looking at Hamilton's race pace, you could argue they were also slower than Racing Bulls and Williams.